Somewhere along your journey, maybe after a powerful spiritual moment, or the quiet collapse of who you thought you were, you felt the ground shift. What used to feel normal started to feel strange. You saw through the illusions, noticed the habits running your life, heard the loud noise of the world, and then came the silence. At first, that silence felt sacred. It felt like freedom, like stepping out of a burning building and finally breathing clean air. But over time, something changed. Meaning started to fade, not in some big dramatic way, but slowly, quietly. It was like your soul dimmed the lights and forgot to turn them back on. You stopped chasing things. You stopped performing, not out of sadness, but from a kind of deep spiritual tiredness. A hollow feeling that was strangely calm, but unsettling too. Then came the whisper, a quiet, aching question. Why do I feel so empty now that I finally see the truth? No one tells you about this part. We're taught that spiritual awakening will fill us with purpose, that seeing through the lies will make us feel clear and alive. But for many people, especially the sensitive ones, the seekers, the deep feelers, it does something else. It empties you. It clears out all the false reasons you were living for, until even your desires feel unfamiliar. And in that emptiness, it's easy to confuse awakening with not caring. I remember a conversation with a close friend, wise, spiritually deep, someone who knew the teachings of Eckhart Tolle, Krishnamurti, Alan Watts. She had just come through a deep inner struggle with new, crystal-clear insight. She told me she had seen through the illusions of ego, success, even love. But 2 months later, I found her lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, completely still. I used to cry about not doing enough, she said. Now, I don't care if I do anything at all. I thought awakening would light me up. Instead, I feel shut off. Carl Jung spoke directly to this strange in-between. He described it as the sacred space between the collapse of the ego and the birth of the true self. A quiet, unsettling terrain where the motivation once powered by approval and identity fades away. And all that's left is raw material, unshaped, waiting. This is not failure. This is individuation. It's the chrysalis stage of the soul, where the caterpillar dissolves completely before it becomes the butterfly. It's the inner death required before real rebirth. But we must be careful not to mistake this emptiness for going backwards, because deep inside that silence is a softer voice, a quieter call. Not the push to prove, but the pull to simply be. Not from a need to be seen, but from something that resonates within. This article isn't about despair. It's about the moment after awakening, when your old fuel runs out and the new source of energy hasn't yet formed. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." So, if you've lost your motivation, it's not the end, it's the sacred beginning, the shift from living as a mask to living as a soul. Long before modern spirituality gave it a name, Jung saw this fog that follows awakening. He didn't dress it up with feel-good words. He spoke with clarity. The soul, once stirred, must descend into its own depths. He wrote, "Enlightenment does not come by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And though those words sound poetic, they carry a hard truth. Real awakening does not give you a crown. It strips you bare. It dismantles the false self. It brings a slow, sacred undoing. The death of who you thought you were. And that collapse goes deep. Your old goals, roles, and ambitions start to fade. The rhythms that once moved you, your work, your relationships, even your daily structure, begin to feel like distant echoes of someone else's life. But here's the important part. Your ego doesn't die. It becomes disoriented. The script it once followed is gone, and no new one has appeared yet. This is not laziness, not apathy. It's a spiritual limbo. You are no longer asleep, but not yet fully awake to what comes next. Jung called this phase the nigredo, the blackening in alchemy. The ego has been broken down, but the self has not yet risen. To the outside world, it looks like you've lost your drive, but in Jungian language, it's something sacred, a holy pause, an in-between space where the soul retreats to rewrite its myth. But our culture fears this stillness. It avoids it, pathologizes it, numbs it, medicates it, because we are taught that growth must look like progress, that silence is failure. But Jung knew better. What you're feeling is not dysfunction. It is initiation, not depression in the clinical sense, though it can feel similar, but the soul's refusal to keep living a life it no longer connects with. And that, Jung believed, is the start of individuation, becoming the true self. Most people don't talk about this part, the ache after the light, the silence after the insight. But that silence isn't empty. It's where something new is forming. And if you can stand still in it, if you can listen, you may see that what looks like demotivation is really the beginning of alignment. The world says you're lost. Jung would say you're being reshaped by something more honest. And that's what we'll explore next. If you've been drifting in the quiet after awakening, staring into the space where your old fire used to burn, know this: you are not broken. You're going through a deep inner shift, so deep in fact that our culture doesn't even have a name for it. A transformation that doesn't just change your thoughts, it rewires the entire structure of your inner world. The goals that once lit a fire in you, the to-do lists, 5-year plans, hustle quotes, they no longer move you. Not because you failed, but because the part of you that needed those things is breaking down. Carl Jung saw this long before it ever became a topic in spiritual circles. Let's make it simple. For most of your life, your energy came from the persona, the mask you wore to survive and succeed in the world. That version of you wanted to be liked, praised, seen. That's not a flaw. That's a normal and necessary stage of development. Jung wrote, "The persona is a system of behavior which is imposed upon the individual by the expectations of society. But when you wake up, you start to see the mask for what it is, a role you played, and suddenly you can't keep acting. You can't chase applause when you realize the stage isn't even real. So the goals that once felt meaningful now feel hollow. They were written by a version of you that no longer exists." And this creates a strange silence inside, like an actor stepping off stage and forgetting his lines. Not because he's lost, because the script doesn't fit anymore. You feel aimless. But it's not because you don't have direction. It's because the identity that needed one has fallen away. You didn't lose your drive. You outgrew the fuel that once powered it. What you're feeling now isn't emptiness. It's a sacred pause, a quiet space where something new and more real is preparing to emerge. The ego pushes, the soul waits, and in that waiting, something holy begins. Jung believed the point of life isn't to glorify the ego, but to integrate it into something deeper, a greater whole. He called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of moving from fragmentation to inner wholeness. Not to become the self that impresses others, but the self that is real. The ego wants success, the self wants alignment. It doesn't care about applause, it only wants truth. So after awakening, the psyche starts to recalibrate. What once excited you now feels flat. Your system begins to reject anything fake, forced, or built from fear. That includes jobs rooted in insecurity, relationships based on performance, or vision boards drawn up by a version of you that never felt like enough. This inner cleansing feels like both freedom and confusion. You're letting go of what's false. But what comes next? Jung warned that many get stuck here. Some awaken only to float into spiritual bypassing. They check out. Call everything an illusion. Pretend nothing matters. But detachment is not disconnection. The self doesn't want to escape life. It wants to live through you, not by retreating, but by embodying. Yet before embodiment comes a threshold. Jung described it clearly, though most don't recognize it when they're in it. It's the gray space after awakening, the void that doesn't feel blissful. It feels disorienting. It doesn't trend on social media. It doesn't look glamorous. It looks like sitting in silence while the world rushes by, unable to explain who you are becoming. Jung would tell you, you are not failing. You are in between. The ego has loosened its grip, but the self hasn't fully taken root. This liminal space is not a mistake. It is an initiation, a descent into the unknown that modern culture rushes to avoid. Stillness is mistaken for laziness. Pause is mistaken for paralysis. So you begin to judge yourself, and that judgment becomes the wall that blocks what your soul is trying to give you. But this phase is sacred. It's chrysalis, not collapse. And if you can stay, if you can resist the urge to run, fix, or numb, you will feel it, the quiet pulse of something deeper rising. The self is not loud, but it is steady. and it is waiting for you to trust what you cannot yet name. Jung had a word for this turning point, enantiodromia, when something, taken to its extreme, flips into its opposite. Nowhere is this more true than after awakening. You move from the hustle of ego, I must do everything, to the stillness of soul. Why do anything at all? That swing doesn't mean you're broken. It means the pendulum is swinging toward balance. The psyche, long trapped in performance, is finally allowed to rest. And this rest, this goo phase, where you are no longer who you were, and not yet who you will become, isn't weakness, it's transformation. It may look unproductive, unclear, and undefined, but it is necessary, because real change starts not in the light, but in the darkness. Not in bypassing, not in good vibes only, but in the sacred descent. You're experiencing a profound inner change, one that modern spirituality often glosses over. It celebrates awakening, but skips over the unraveling, the quiet undoing of who you thought you were. Carl Jung never romanticized this phase. He called it essential. He taught that the shadow, the parts of ourselves we avoid, repress, or fear, is not something to escape, but something to face and bring home. Shadow work isn't advanced spirituality. It's the beginning of becoming whole. And now, as you sit in this strange stillness, this space of nothingness, your unconscious rises, not as an enemy, but as a messenger. All the things you push down, your grief, anger, unmet needs, they start to surface. Not to punish you, but because there's finally room for them to be seen. So, the ego panics. It wants movement, purpose, identity. It craves something to do, but the self whispers, let go. I'm building something deeper. And this is where real transformation begins. Not in striving, but in surrender. Not in knowing, but in witnessing. Your psyche is not broken, it's healing. It's processing years of noise, masks, false motives. So everything that once drove you, ambition, urgency, need for approval, goes quiet. You're left sitting with the parts of yourself you've never made space for. And in that stillness, something stirs. A new kind of motivation. One that hums, not roars. One that moves you, not from anxiety, but from truth. Jung called this the emergence of the self, not as a concept, but as a living compass inside you. The self doesn't chase, it calls. And it calls you not toward success, but toward wholeness. You've crossed a threshold. You've stood in the silence. You've wandered the dark night where no one tells you who you are anymore. And now, something ancient is waking up inside you, not with fireworks, but with a subtle pull, not a command, but an invitation. This is the beginning of the symbolic life. What Jung described as a life no longer run by ego or social scripts, but led by something deeper, the soul. When the ego quiets and the unconscious is welcomed, life stops being about survival and starts becoming about meaning. Here's the paradox. It may look simple, even ordinary, because when the self begins to lead, you stop hustling, you respond. You're not driven by FOMO, but guided by alignment. You stop chasing clarity and start recognizing it when it arrives, quietly, often dressed in simplicity. Living from the self doesn't mean you're always confident or energized. You'll still feel tired, uncertain, human. But the ache of self-betrayal is gone. The pressure to perform a role that no longer fits is gone. In its place is something steady. You create when no one's clapping. You say no even when yes is expected. You follow curiosity instead of checking boxes. This is not laziness. It's a new kind of fuel, not from adrenaline, but from alignment. Not from pressure, but from presence. Jung called this symbolic living, not as fantasy, but as coming home to soul. You begin to trust subtle signals, dreams, gut feelings, symbols. Your life becomes a dialogue, not a one-way shout into the void. And what does that look like? You ask different questions, not, what should I do? But, what's quietly calling me? Not, how do I prove myself? But, what feels true? You stop trying to dominate life and begin to partner with it. Ambition doesn't vanish, it transforms. It becomes devotion to what's real, to what's alive in you, to what matters. And somehow, that quiet devotion moves mountains. It gets things done, but without draining your soul, because it's powered not by fear, but by wholeness. This is the self's motivation, not to impress, but to express. You teach, you create, you serve, not because you should, but because your whole being says yes. So if you're wondering where your spark went after awakening, know this: it's not gone. The old fire burned away to make space for a deeper flame, one that doesn't flicker in the storm. Jung never promised ease. He promised depth. If you've read this far, if something inside you stirred, you're already on the path. This is not the end of your awakening. This is the beginning of your becoming. If a single sentence in this message felt true for you, leave a comment. Have you met someone whose presence felt like home? Or are you still walking that sacred path back to yourself? Your story, even if it's unfinished, may be the light someone else is searching for. And if you know someone who's quietly struggling, believing love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that peace is something they don't deserve, share this video. Because true love never demands we shrink, and real connection never asks for the soul's silence. The most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you build within. That's your foundation. That's your home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born. Before you go, subscribe and tap the bell. Here, we go beneath the surface. We explore the psyche, the shadow, the soul, how every relationship reflects our own evolution. If there's a question, a theme, or a wound you'd like us to explore, leave it in the comments. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it's needed. Thank you for showing up, not just to this content, but to your inner work. And always remember, when the right person comes, your soul will know, not by fear, but by peace. Until then, let your most sacred relationship be the one you nurture with your own inner truth. That is the root, that is the fire, and that is the beginning. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.